of 2025. It's 10:09 a.m. And I want to take a roll call. I'm Jill Veith. We've got Howard Matz,
Here.
Caroline Baltzer, John Kitchener,
Here.
Don Holgate.
I'm here.
Hi, Don, and Christy Kickham.
Here.
And for staff, we have Sue Carmel. Hi, Sue.
Here.
Oh, and
Sorry.
and Pete Hazer's here. Hi, Pete.
Pete's here. Hey guys.
How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you.
It is being audio video recorded. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
And on the motion, John,
Aye.
Pete,
Hi.
Dawn,
Hi.
Christy,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Caroline, Jill, I'm an aye. And we move on to public comment. Is there any public comment? And I'm gonna close public comment. I don't know if everybody got a chance to look at the minutes from October. We're a little backlogged on minutes, I know. But as we all know, we've kind of been a little short-staffed. You all want to wait and do that later?
I have not looked at them.
Okay, that's fine. Then Sue, maybe we won't approve the minutes today. Is that okay? Or,
The only problem with that is we do have a request for 12.
oh yeah,
of the
we did
minutes.
have there was
So-
like a FOIA request.
Yes, and we won't, if we're not gonna be meeting for a while, I would respectfully ask if you're able to approve them today. That would be great.
Okay, great.
You give me just like a minute, I can probably. Can we do them at the end of the meeting?
Yeah,
Sure.
so we have all those on the email?
Yes, it was attached with the agenda.
And Madam Chair, I'm going to be dropping off before the end of the meeting, so
Yeah.
I did take a look at them and I'm okay with them.
Okay, great. And is everybody else okay with the minutes?
In case the meeting goes past 11, I am in agreed and then lockstep with John.
And we could revisit it just before they leave. Maybe.
Yeah.
I
right,
think
you-
John's 10:30.
Yeah,
That's all.
let's just keep going and those were kind of our early discussion days, so those are important. Okay, so I guess the next item on our agenda is to talk about planning for this year. And I will be really honest, I don't have a super strong agenda. I just thought we should all regroup and people can talk about what things they liked, what they didn't like, where we might change some things. I'm not planning on this being some long meeting right now.
Liz, Rebecca, and Miss Marie.
But if we want to change things in the software, we need to talk about it now because it takes them quite a while to update the software. We don't want to dump that on them in July and then start meeting in August, and that's not gonna work very well. And then that way we can probably get a chance to practice it or something beforehand, so. With that, I open it up to you all, and I think John wanted to go first since he's limited on time. So John?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Madam Chair. It would be helpful, Sue, if you could pull up as a shared screen any Rory, it doesn't matter which it is, I happen to be looking at the cobblestone thing, but it doesn't matter, just so everybody can see, a typical Rory screen, so that'll make my comments more understandable.
Ironically, I had the cobblestone open as well.
Well, that's the one then. Okay, so I'll make it quick, Jill. And, I think most people know this was my first year on the committee. So some of this for the rest may not be so relevant. But first, if you go to the criteria, the group and criteria, I think it would be a good moment, and not today, but before we get into the next cycle, to really take a look at the groups and the criteria to see if they are still the most relevant descriptors of what we should be looking at, or whether we should make some changes. Because those two columns are kind of the, you know, they're the rock of everything else we do. And I found some of them a little perhaps duplicative, and perhaps for other things these days it might be better. So I would just say, be good to, I think, for us all to take a look at those and
And go through.
endorse them or make some changes.
Yeah. I agree. Some of it, I don't understand the groupings of them. So continuity A, B, and
Yeah,
continuity and C.
yeah,
Should
yeah.
each thing get a separate value and then we just.
yeah,
an
yeah.
Individual value is, do you know, Sue, why Stephen wanted to group those things together?
I do not. I think this goes back to when this was first created, so I can't speak to that. I don't know, Peter, were you on the committee at that time?
Yeah, I think Christy and I both might have been. I definitely was. I do think, and this is more in Steven's arena, but I think a lot of it was pulled from the what's the term of the policies and procedures, the town's financial policies and procedures, or whatever
yeah.
that document is that Steve referenced ad nauseum throughout, you know, since he began this effort all the way through his last days.
Yeah.
I think he was very adamant that this wasn't all necessarily his brainchild out of thin air, but a lot of the structuring and a lot of these categories were specifically quoted from and pulled from whatever that document is, the town's.
Yeah, it's like the
Fiscal-
financial policies and procedures. We mentioned that in the Capcom report, actually, that we're keeping with that.
Yeah.
Right. And,
But
and
so
so
it-
I think that's how he structured the majority of these originally, which held all the way up through until this past year when we kind of changed some of the terms to make them a little bit more understandable. Granted, obviously it wasn't a silver bullet, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, for me, Madam Chair, and then I'll kind of move on. But for me, this ought to be more about decision-making criteria, not policy and procedure things. Because, you know,
Yes.
I mean, the numbers this year, we all know, were very, very big. And I think we would have been better served by a little different set of groups and criteria. So, you know, not to do it today, but, you know, I would at least ask that we consider doing that. And then, you know, if you go across the page, so if we can see the top again, yeah. So then, you know, the criteria relevance, and then, you know, our individual rankings, I would just ask that we really take a look, and I'm going to defer a little bit here to Howard, because he took me through all of this, as so did Christy. But it became a little bit obvious that the mathematics behind some of this, both in the criteria relevance, and then when as members we're allocating our own percentages, it seemed to me that we need to really go back and look at whether the mathematical formulas are doing what we want them to do, and make sure that the data entry process is simple and robust. And we came across a couple of issues with that. So, you know, again, not for today. I just think we ought to take a look at those columns, criteria relevance, and then where we put in our own percentages, and just stress test it to make sure we're not just blindly following something that was perhaps correct a while ago, but may not be these days. So that would be my second thing, Madam Chair. And then just finally on that part of it, you know, I think some of us struggled a bit as we were going through, you know, the three or 4 months or so. It was hard to kind of keep track of which RORAs had we actually individually finalized and we're done with it,
Yeah,
compared to the drafts that we got some numbers in there, but no, we're not, we're not final with them yet. And it was difficult to easily find the ones I still need to work on versus not. So, I think it'd be worth taking a look at that to see whether there's a way to make that a little more simple.
yeah,
So maybe I'll stop there for a second.
no. I don't disagree with any of that. Do you all have any?
If I could just, to John, maybe to John's last point
Yeah.
about the sort of the coding. I mean, we've kind of struggled with this for a while as far as, how to present it so that we clearly see what we're working on for that season. I know that, the finance department had mentioned that when a request is created, it's gonna have that creation date. But I guess I would reach out to Sue or Brian and find out if there's a different way or an additional way to code to make it relative for that year's requests, even though a request might have been created in 2023. If we're
Yeah.
revisiting, for example, cobblestone repair, which we kind of know comes back each year, but it would still be nice for it to be coded or color coded somehow so that we know this year, we need to, work on that Rory. As well as, and I think the other thing for me was having some way of us being able to determine that we finished that one. That one is color coded because we completed it. That is complete and done. And I'm not sure how else to do that.
Yeah,
Can you give an example of the first point you made?
Yeah, let me see here. Yeah, I can. I would say, well, Caroline and I were just looking at, for example, cobblestone improvements, which I think it looks like it was created, it might have been created before, but the code is 20-003.
Right.
But it's something we're working on. That's a bad example because we work on that annually, that one comes back as a repeat.
mm-hmm,
But if it wasn't, it's coded like it is an old request.
yeah,
It's not coded like it's a new one for us to revisit.
So would you prefer that to be 2025 and then in the notes or somewhere in the page where we look at the description that this is a ongoing or, or this is a repeat for the last 3 years kind of text? Is that the way you would handle it? maybe?
Well, what I'm trying to do is when we pull up our Rorys and we have the list of Rorys in front of us. So we don't have to keep clicking on each Rory to see if that's the one we're working on.
Oh,
When we have the Rory page, it has the list of them, all the departments, everything, that on that page, as we scroll through them, through the pages, there's usually 7 or 8 pages of Rorys, that we have an indicator on that page that we know we've already, or that's one that is current, being under consideration for current voting.
would this help? I had, John had given me a summary sheet that Sue had given him that listed all of the items for all of the years. So if you looked at 2025, you could see the requests specific by department for that year. And I use that as the reference to determine what was current and what wasn't.
So do I. I basically, so when we get our spreadsheets for each department, I staple them all together. I highlight the ones that I've completed and I do that, and it's fine.
yeah,
But,
Different point. I'm not
But it's-
making that point.
what's that?
I'm not making that point. I'm saying you didn't know, you'd like to know in the current year that something that's coded 2003 really is for 2025.
Yes,
and then that's
And-
new money for 25.
new money for 25.
If you look at the big
Yeah.
sheet that has all the columns and all the departments by year for many years, you can pick out the ones specifically for this year right off it.
Yeah.
If you look at it,
Yeah,
but that exists.
Madam
No.
Chair, can I jump
You
in?
might not have had it.
I don't know.
So John,
So,
Yeah,
John, go-
well, I do think Christie's got a point, and But for me, I'd state it a little differently in that those items that Christie is talking about, you know, the making mindset that we should be in for those are completely different to, you know, a new item shows up for $5 million that we've never seen before and may never see again. You know, it's that I think it's almost like those continuing from prior years. It's almost like that's a separate section of items that we should just look at, because we've already done the heavy lifting when it comes to thinking about it. It's just, is this the right number for this year? And sort of put them in a box all together somehow. And I'm not looking to solve this today, but I think when Christie said it's not a good example, I actually think it's a very good example of what some of the things we should be looking at.
Yeah, that one in particular, because, I mean, listen, every request every year, all the money, and I'm saying this probably more for Caroline, it's all new money. Everything we look at every year is new money. It's just not necessarily a new request. So it didn't get funded the year before.
Yeah.
So they're asking again.
Mhm.
Cobblestones, they ask for that money every year. This year we said no, because we've been letting them have borrowing authority and they're not using it. So there was no reason to give them more borrowing authority because they don't have plans to do it. They still could borrow last year's money and use that for this year.
So why did they put the request in?
That's what we asked, and that's why it didn't score very low. I think it's just something they do routinely. It's just part of the routine maintenance.
And I don't think they looked back to determine that they had plenty of money there, that more that they could spend in the oncoming fiscal year. And that's their fault. That's what they should be doing. They shouldn't have put a request in if they had a lot of money left over.
A balance.
Right.
More than they possibly could spend in the next year.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. That's what I mean, Howard. You know, our thought process and questioning is different for that group of items than it is, okay, here's a new request for a new item.
So, John, I think Sue should be maybe instructing the department that if it's an ongoing item, that they should only be requesting what they need as the delta that they will be able to then in total spend for the year under consideration.
And Sue
Yeah.
does know what they've spent
Yeah.
and what that is. It's just sometimes we have to ask her individually, and that kind of makes it hard on
And
Sue.
remember, that also happened with the airport. They had money left over and we didn't know that, you know, how much in their numbers was the new money versus, you know, the additional cost overrun.
Right.
Case by case though,
Yes.
Yeah.
case by case, because there are a few examples where,
Yeah,
where, you know, in the case of Cobblestone, a lot of it comes down to, manpower and just being able to do the work,
Yeah.
because they're restricted to certain times of the year,
So
you
that,
know?
I'm,
But there is a few examples, where there is annual requests for funds, where, a balance is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
For instance, like the fire hydrant question, remember? They weren't able to do all the fire hydrant.
Correct,
They just couldn't possibly do that, but they had the budget item for it.
yeah.
but that's something I wanted to know.
But-
We wanted to include that in Aurora, like, can you actually get this done? Like,
Yeah.
do you have the manpower to do it?
And the
You
other
know,
thing is, do
I
you
think that
need the
Dick
whole?
Braden knows exactly how many people he employs and how much road he can actually pave every year. Like, we could know that in the beginning of the year
Right.
was something I was thinking about,
I
like,
believe also that you need to look at the item and ascertain whether or not there's a contract behind it, because you have to let a contract with the full amount of the money allocated and budgeted for, right? So
I'm sorry.
Yep.
you have a contract. You can't let the contract unless you have enough money approved.
Correct.
So that's important too. So even though you might not be able to spend it in that year, you must have that approved. in order to sign a contract.
Correct.
See, and Howard,
Case by case. I think that what you said, I think does fall on us in our
Yeah.
questioning more than it might blanket fall on Sue for telling the department heads.
So how would you like to handle this? Or do you want to just be cognizant of it and know that that's something?
I think if
No,
there's
I'm-
something, they
I'm-
could just say this is a repeat request, or this is an annual
Yeah, like a
request, like,
checkbox.
yeah, just like that could be in their form that they fill out. Is
Yeah.
this is this an ongoing request? Is it a repeat request? Or when's the last time you requested this money?
And are there funds remaining that haven't been spent that were
Yeah.
approved?
Yeah, I
So do
think
you want
that's
those
helpful for
check
infrastructure.
Boxes in the
The
request.
application.
But
Yeah.
then also then, Madam Chair, see, that takes me back to, you know, the criteria, and maybe a couple of these items that we've just talked about, like, you know, is the manpower available, for example, or
Yeah.
that might be one of the criteria on here, because if the answer to that is no, well, you know, that's going to affect how we rank the thing. So that's what I mean about taking a look at that criteria, because some of these things may be better off or important enough to be in the criteria, whereas, you know, sort of appropriateness of cost may not be. I don't know what that means, you know. So anyway, I mean, it's not for today, but you know, I mean, I think we're getting a flavor here that everybody has some points of view on things that should be changed, right? So we're probably going to need a process to do that.
So, John, maybe there are two criteria that you're thinking of adding. One is in the Rory is to rate, is this money necessary for a cost overrun of an already approved project? Because that might be an important thing. And the
Yeah.
second, could you spend the money if you had the money?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And I didn't
In
write
the
those
fiscal
down.
year.
Well,
Yeah.
here's
Meaning on the schedule here, so we rate it, so
Well, you
that,
gotta make sure, I mean, they can spend the money, but if you're not clear, they'll spend it 3 years later.
well,
could you spend it in that
Yeah.
next?
here's an example, and maybe Sue can answer this. The jetties money that we approved for the courts. So that actually came in under budget. So that means, so I think we approved, did we approve
1.9.
was it 1.9? But I think the whole project came in at 1. So,
Wow.
How do you remember that?
But we
well,
voted
they
in-
had only just finished the project. So when he came and bid on it,
Oh.
it was less than they thought. So what happens with that borrowing authority? Do we vote to take away the unused borrowing authority? Or are they gonna use the money for something else? I'm just using it as an example. I'm not picking
Well,
on,
how does the finance
Carol.
department deal with it? I think that they had an allocation of what.
I
they
can't
could
hear
spend.
you.
Would you like me to respond to that, Madam Chair?
That would be
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you.
So in the case of a borrowing authorization, if the project comes in under the amount that was authorized, we would rescind at town meeting the difference between what the total project cost was and what the authorization was.
Right, but with the authority, does he have the authority to do other things and improvements at the courts where he can still spend the money? That's what I was curious about, like, can he improve the hut? Or, you know, does that still fall under what we talked about in terms of the courts, but there's more to courts than there's landscape and, you know, they've got to fix the driveway and things like that.
Yes, if it's within the scope of what the project was voted on at town meeting, then yes, they can.
Right, but they can't take that money and then take it to another department.
No,
Yeah. Okay, Howard?
Sue, how does the cancellation of the overage occur at the town meeting? Is it because a new budget is approved?
I'm not sure I'm following what
So
you're asking.
$10 were allocated, 8, and we approved 10, 8 were used, 2 were not necessary. You said at the town meeting, the next town meeting, that gets
Rescinded.
zeroed out. How does that work mechanically? Is that just in the budget for the next year?
No, it's only for a borrowing authorization. We rescind the authorization.
Yeah, not the money,
I've
just,
never seen, do we see that?
yeah,
Yes.
FinCom does votes about that, actually. We do.
I believe it's article, Brian's gonna correct me on this. I
No, I
think it
never
might
paid
be
attention.
23 this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is in there. It's just not listed each one, and so you don't connect, because it just says
I
rescind,
didn't, thank you.
you know, but it doesn't say, oh, I'm gonna rescind 500,000 because we didn't
And
need it.
actually, Madam Chair, it is Article 23. In order to rescind debt, you have to list the article number that was authorized, the ATM, and the purpose of the article and the amount that you're rescinding. So it's individually in there for everything we rescind. That's the only way we can do it.
I'm sorry that I didn't notice that before, Brian, I apologize.
That's okay. The only way we can rescind a borrowing authorization is to actually list the article, the annual town meeting, the purpose, and the amount that we're rescinding. Just so that everyone on the committee is clear on how we actually go about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's great.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just put it all together. John's gonna.
Oh, John, go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, through you, a question to Brian. Brian, I assume that if, let's just take the courts, if that's underspent, I could see, okay, maybe, you know, building a hut for the courts, I could see that, but we can't take that money and then use it for cobblestones, for example, right? I mean, or can we?
So that's a good question, John. So anytime there's any unspent proceeds or with a borrowing, anytime there's the borrowing or the project comes in under what was authorized, it can only be used for what was specifically authorized in the borrowing language. So as an example for the courts, the bid did come in lower than what the project was authorized at annual town meeting. I believe, Sue will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this was a debt exclusion as well. So there'd be even further limitations on what we could do with this anyway. So in this particular instance, in my opinion, the language was broad enough that we can renovate the building that historically where NRD was, but historically over time had been used for the courts as well. So we are going to do some renovations to the building that is immediately adjacent to the courts because it had over a period of time been used as, for lack of a better word, a hut for the tennis courts. So in my opinion, the language did allow us to do not take it all the way down to the foundation and rebuild the building, but it did allow for some renovations to it to be able to use it for a hut again.
Yeah.
However, if the language if we had determined that the language had not gotten, not allowed for that, the only thing we really would have been able to do, in my opinion, would have been to rescind the unused borrowing capacity or unused or unneeded money because it had a debt exclusion attached to it. And you cannot transfer a debt exclusion with a borrowing authorization. Now, with other borrowing authorizations, with unused, if we had borrowed money and the project came in under budget and we had unused proceeds from borrowings, we can transfer those to other projects, but they have to be for similar type projects and for the same length of time that we could borrow for the previously approved projects. But debt exclusions, particularly in this instance, prevent us from doing anything other than that project or rescinding the unneeded borrowing capacity. Because the debt exclusion is for that specific project and the borrowing is for that specific project predicated on a successful debt exclusion. So we're very limited with that particular example, what we could do.
Right. Caroline?
And does this have to be done within the same fiscal year or what's?
No,
Like-
capital articles stay open until the project is done.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Pete,
So-
go ahead.
So just to kind of dumb it down and recap, so assuming it's, say, a general fund spending and it's very broad language, it can be transferred for a similar project, very broadly speaking.
Broadly speaking, provided there's no debt exclusion, the debt
Provided there's
exclusion,
no debt exclusion
if
associated
it's
with it.
just
right?
a
And
regular borrowing within Proposition 2.5 levy limit, we could ask town meeting to transfer, provided we had borrowed for it and had the unexpended funds. Yes, we could.
Gotcha. And so that has to be approved at town meeting though, or is that just something that can be done?
Yes, no, no, no. I do not have unilateral authority to do
Okay.
that. Town
Got it.
meeting has to give me the authority to do it.
Okay, so let's say, a department can't just say, oh, we have money left over from this project, let's move it over to this project.
Yeah, no,
Okay, got
that's
it.
not, there's
So there's
no,
at least that check and balance involved.
yes, it would have to go through FinCom, would have to make a recommendation, and then town meeting would have to either vote in the affirmative or the negative.
Okay, because yeah, I do recall, and I don't know what project it was or what request, but in the past that this has come up and that there was the possibility to do so in certain circumstances. So great,
Yes.
But
Thank you,
that,
Brian.
thanks, Brian, but if that comes up at town meeting, you're transferring that borrowing authority?
Which one?
If you have an example like the courts, let's say you did want to move the jetties money and you were like, oh, we've spent enough here, but we've got 900,000 more dollars, but we need to
No,
do
the-
something.
The courts, no, because it's a debt exclusion.
Yeah,
Any
sorry,
unused
that's a bad
capacity-
example.
Yeah.
If it didn't have a debt exclusion.
If it didn't have a debt exclusion and there was a project that was similar that needed funding, and had a similar, life in terms of the amount, how long it could be borrowed, then we would consider it. Or, but we've
But
done
you
that.
have to have
very
the
few and-
huge project anyway, so it's not like you could just.
Yeah, we haven't really typically done that, only from the perspective that in my tenure here, we have not, prior to my arrival, we did utilize it in the first couple of years that I was here because we were cleaning a lot of it up. But during my tenure, we've only borrowed what we've needed for the project. We've not borrowed the entire amount of the authorization and had unspent bond proceeds sitting around that we've had to deal with for numerous
Yeah.
reasons. The most critical one being the fact that I just don't believe in doing that because that ultimately the taxpayers are paying for it. And I think that's a very poor way to manage it. So during my tenure, we really haven't been in a situation where we've had unspent bond proceeds that we could transfer somewhere. So I don't envision a scenario going forward where we would have a lot of those.
Well, that's a real bummer, Brian, because I want you to take that money and build some more pickle courts maybe out of town Nevers. I think that would be a good idea. Very
I
smart about it.
hate to burst your bubble, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
No, I
Brian,
want to redo the hut and all that,
Brian,
make it great down there.
I mean, one last question, Brian. I mean, could we take unspent money and put it into the development of a quieter pickleball, or a
They already have it.
I don't know if we want to get into research and development, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That can be very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should go ahead and get those companies to come here and give us free stuff to try it out for
Oh.
them, though. That's what we should do.
Yeah.
We'll sell them a little banner at the courts and
Mhm.
get a little money out of them. It'd be great.
Madam Chair, I'm getting close to when I gotta leave, so could I just?
Yeah,
my
go
last
ahead, John.
item?
Thank you.
Yeah, so changing gears a little bit, but I did find, in my first year that I don't think our current processes and definitions of, whether it's criteria relevant or whatever, they're not well defined and documented. And I really think this doesn't have to be a one and done thing, but I do think it would be worthwhile to have a process where we really document fully what each of the individual processes are and what the definition of all of these different names that we're bandying about today. Because I think that would be really helpful as new members,
Yeah.
transition onto the,
Good night.
and even for existing members to make sure we all are understanding the same thing about the same term.
Yeah, can I make a comment about that? Because I totally understand that. One of the things I like about this process is that we can interpret those things the way we each individually want to. And so I like that because otherwise these questions become facts. And that's not what the questions are for, I don't think. I think they're for interpretation.
Yeah.
They're for your opinion. And that's why I don't like some of these questions, because I'm like, it supports the strategic plan of the select board or independent commission. Well, to me, that's a fact. So I answer that honestly, is it in there or not? But like, that's just like something you know, so why, I'm not saying it doesn't have a value. But I think that value could already be in the value that's placed on that, you know, group or that grouping without us answering a question that, to me, that's how I view a question like that. Reduces energy consumption. I mean, that one I really struggle with because it might reduce energy consumption in terms of the monthly bill once it's built, but it's a bigger building, so it's gonna use more energy. So I really get frustrated with that.
Yeah.
You know, but each one has its own like pros and cons.
Yeah, I was thinking more, I don't disagree with that. It's just that some of the things like criteria relevance, ratios as a percentage of CR, ratios as a percentage of GRORI, and then straight up, you know, I just think that we ought to be,
So you definition more for those, I see.
Yeah, so that when somebody joins, that we really do know what what is meant by each of these columns and so forth. And what the process is, because it took me a while to understand, the role of Capcom versus the role of FinCom, as we go to town meeting, the borrowing stuff and debt exclusion, those kinds of things. I thought I knew a fair amount about how the town works, but I realized, there was some gaps that I didn't understand. And I think to be a productive Capcom participant over that four-month period, we need to understand all of that and maybe have a sit down perhaps with Brian before we get started and go over it all. So, I just to try to make sure everybody has a good level of understanding of what we're doing and why, and what some of these things really mean. So, that's really my last thing. Thanks.
Well, maybe we could incorporate that to like a kickoff meeting at the beginning of the season, and Brian and Sue would be able to educate us, to say, hey, this is kind of where we are with the requests, and this is what they mean, and this is kind of what it'll look like on the warrant. I mean, I think most of us on the committee can explain some of that stuff, but yeah. I think thanks a lot, Mr. Kitchener.
All right, sorry guys, I gotta drop
off. Do the minutes really quickly?
Yeah, do you want to?
I'm good to go.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes or not approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
On your motion, John? Or on the motion? John, or for the minute? Pete?
Aye.
Dawn? I don't know if she's still here. Chrissy?
Aye.
Howard? Caroline?
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Okay, Jill, I'm an aye. Your minutes are approved, Sue. Woo!
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the fourth time we're doing it.
Bye, everybody. See you
Bye,
next
John. Thank you.
later in the year. Bye-bye.
So.
Okay.
Just a quick question about,
Caroline, go ahead.
so since Stephen Welch was the architect of the system, the Rory system.
Yeah.
I was thinking, since I like John, I'm, trying to get up to speed here, and I'm interested in the system and how it works. And so I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll ask Stephen Welch, but is it more appropriate for me to sit down with either Sue or Brian to go over that?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Sounds like we still have a little bit of work to do. Just some discussion points to sort of all be on the same page. So it's gonna morph a little bit, I think. I would say, overall, if you want follow-up, like information on it, that's one thing, but I think we're gonna still be, like, I do think that some of these criteria, it's just, to me, I'm like, why am I presenting this? It's just so weird. And I would like to revisit some of and some of them I love, I think some of these are great items, but some are really, as long as I've been on the committee, still not clear. There's a few that are not clear. So, and there's some that are, the answer is always gonna kind of be yes. I mean, and as you say, like, for example, reduces energy consumption, like, how far do you read into that? Is it, on one side, you could be getting an electric car, which is very clear. On the other side, you're putting in a new building, which, as you say, it's a new building, but it's gonna have like LED
More
lights.
lights,
So
more
how,
lights.
how much do you read into that item,
I don't know.
And it's just, I think there's a different way to phrase that one. But I think that,
The
and I
truth
think- I
is, the
think-
broader ones are kind of better, like improves efficiency and effectiveness. I'm like, yeah, I can-
yeah, I mean.
yeah. I think if you get too specific,
Yeah, if it's not a vehicle, for the most part, everything's gonna improve infrastructure, it's just kind of,
yeah, I agree.
I don't wanna like grade something that is just totally like really doesn't weigh into decision-making.
Yeah.
I like the fact side of it that you say, and I think overall, and I think the original intent was to have historical documentation of the process, and, so, I would love to revisit some of these criteria.
Yeah, I think, well, some of the factual ones, like that strategic plan one, I feel like it gets a high value anyway, gets a really high value. I think that could just be baked in to the values without us having to answer that question. That's kind of how I feel about some of the
Yeah.
factual ones.
But
So-
so, Howard's point, asking the question about, existing balance, or, is this, will this get completed in the fiscal year? Those are relevant questions for this committee.
Well,
know?
maybe another larger way to look at it, I'm throwing this out there, and is. What is it that we're trying to get the departments to do to either, are we trying to get them to sharpen their pencil, like? And each request is different, they can't really, it's hard to compare them. But. The airport, I use them as an example, they came in, they asked for money, and they're like, I just want to design and build, I want all the authorization I need to do that all at once. Well, there's other ways to look at that, right? You could say, why don't you ask for money to design first and then come back for the construction money? Because then we'll know what it costs after you've designed it, right? Or you could say, if you want design and build money now, then you need to know what all those costs are. And then, that's harder on them actually to do it that way, I think, because it's less, but it's easier for them to come and just say, well, just give me authorization and I won't spend it if I don't need it. And I don't love that. And I don't know, Brian, how you feel about that. That's more important.
Can you repeat that question, Madam Chair? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you shouldn't pay attention to us, right? It's okay. When department heads come in and say, I want to ask for this amount of money, and but I'm only gonna spend what I need. Just by nature, I don't love that. Do you care if they do it that way? I think that's one of the reasons we really got into it with the airport.
Well, I think I look at it two ways. I hope that during the development and the refinement of the capital plan and working with Sue and the great work that she does in working with the departments, that what they come to you with is a realistic expectation of what they need, right? First of all. But I'm also try to remain cognizant of the fact that we also live 30 miles out in the middle of the ocean, and costs may be a little bit more difficult sometimes to estimate what they're gonna be out here. So, I do not like to have to go back to not only through Capcom to FinCom and town meeting multiple times, because I think it sets kind of a bad precedent in the way we do business, but it also just continuously increases the cost for projects and then makes it more difficult to get projects through all the time. So I think that my preference would be that we have a number that we're confident in, but also have a number that we're confident in that has some flexibility so that we can meet the scope of the project and be able to complete the project in a timely manner and not have to continuously come back to through Capcom to FinCom and to the voters, because I don't think that serves anybody very well at all in the long
Yeah.
run.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I think that's
What
the
do
best way that I can answer that. I mean,
you- Yeah, no,
ideally,
what do you-
a number that works perfectly every single time, but I think that that's very unrealistic to hope for every single time.
Yeah, I agree. I wondered, like, what do you think about, like, I really kind of respect how you guys did it with our island home. It was a big number to go and design, but it got approved. And then now you kind of know what the construction costs are and you're coming back for that money separately. That's not what happened with town employee housing. It's not what happened with the airport. And I don't think there's any format that you have that you're working from. And I just wondered if there was any guidance from you about that, like every project should just be treated differently on that front, or, you know, town employee housing, I mean, they have the land. So there's some costs there that are already like, don't have to factor in, which is great. So,
I mean, I think town employee housing might be slightly different in terms of the fact that there may be a little bit more of an urgency to that one. In
Mhm.
terms of wanting to have design, OPM and construction money all in the same authorization so that we can move from one to the other more seamlessly and effortlessly than given the severity of the situation that we're working diligently to deal with. Island Home, I think the sheer enormity of the project just lent itself to identifying a number that we felt comfortable with for OPM and design, and hopefully the number that we have will get us all the way through construction services, which I think it might get us all the way through there. So I think realistically, sometimes I think that that's a case by case basis, which way to proceed, because I think they're kind of two different situations in some respects, in how you look at them and how we went about them.
yeah, well, that's why I was asking. I don't think there's any like formula we can have. I think each project really is case by case basis, and I think we have to continue to operate under that personally. Howard?
So one of the things when we talked about the airport was that they were looking for design money as well as for the construction money, and yet we didn't know what they were designing. Therefore, we didn't know what they were building, and therefore we didn't know what the numbers were, you know, how to value or feel confident in what their request was, or even look at it. And so to me, putting it all together, bundling it wasn't really in anybody's interest in our process in evaluating these. So, you know, Brian, I wondered, could you respond to that?
I mean, at the end of the day, the airport is part of the town, Howard, I guess, but also has the more flexibility than the general fund departments, I guess, in how they do it and the input that they get from us. I mean, it's a little easier for us in terms of working with general fund departments to kind of structure that versus the airport. And it is not to say that the airport doesn't come and talk to us, but you know, at the end of the day, the airport felt that what they put forward to you was the best course of action and the best roadmap for them. And I guess I would suggest it wasn't necessarily very dissimilar for the way that we went about Wait Drive. Maybe it was, you know, maybe the way they presented the numbers was different, or maybe the way they presented the entire project was different. but they, you know, they kind of took the same approach, I think, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think that the latter point you raised on the airport was the driving factor, which was the context of what we had been told in previous years for previous approvals as it influenced this particular request. And I think that the Wait Drive didn't have the legacy of what they had told us before to influence what we were thinking about for this current request.
No, and I think that that's a valid point. I mean, Wade Drive came to you this year I mean, it had gone previously as a concept for feasibility and design and was
Yeah.
somewhat roundly defeated at town meeting based on some, based on feedback from the residents. And we went back to the drawing board and said, this is what we think we need to do, and here's how we want to accomplish it. And I think that they put together a good plan. And I'm not going to say that the airport doesn't have a good plan, but I understand what you're saying in terms of what had been presented over previous itinerations of that. And I understand that completely.
Thank you.
Hey, sorry, Madam Chair, I gotta jump to an 11.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Thanks for joining.
See you,
Nope.
Peter.
No problem. Thanks, guys. See you soon. Or hopefully, see you around.
I want to just encourage us to, I'm happy to make changes with how we do some things. But I don't know that we need broad sweeping changes because that could be a little overwhelming otherwise. And I don't think we're looking to rewrite the software so much at all. But I think we could have a subcommittee if you want to have 2-3 people talk about how we want to change the criteria or refine it or change the values on those. I'm okay with that.
If I was a new member, most of those would be confusing.
Yeah.
To me.
It was, but you did learn how to do it because it
Oh, yeah.
was new to you at
Yeah.
one point.
I did, but there are still some, even with readjustment last year, that are. They kind of lead you in, I already know how I'm gonna vote before I even get to it. Because it's, I do think a sort of revisit of some of the criteria definitions. Would be kind of a good little exercise.
Do you all want to do like a subcommittee for that? Or have just a smaller group meet and say this is it and then present it and we could, again, I just don't want to overwhelm changing the program.
Yeah,
There's a lot to that for the finance department to
Yeah.
coordinate with Plum. It's a lot on Sue. But I mean, changing some of these words and values,
Yeah.
probably not such a big deal, but if we want to add 5 more questions or.
Yeah,
I don't know.
well, Christian,
What do you
the
got?
question is, if we had a subcommittee, it would exclude some people, and everybody needs to know the subtleties of each of the thoughts that we made in making changes.
No, I agree.
So,
Right.
to me, a subcommittee doesn't meet the
Well,
purpose of a small.
This is already kind of a subcommittee.
Yeah, no, we're small.
We are already kind of a subcommittee.
So I don't know, I think I'd like to have a meeting, we pick a section to go through and we talk about what people's concerns are about. How they complement each other or they're useful in that category and what the issues, like you raised a couple subtle issues. And hammer out a section at a time so that then we all know what we're intending by those categories.
Right.
The other thing is I think there's a simple arithmetic fix that needs to be made. And we can talk about that, but that's a pretty quick conversation.
Okay. Carolyn?
Would it make sense as part of going through how we might tweak it? Would it make sense to have Stephen Welch come in and explain his
No,
thinking about it?
Not anymore because he's not on the committee, so he's not
I'm-
thinking about the rating, in my
Yes,
opinion.
and how it
You know,
applies.
I think, I care what you think about
Yeah.
it as you read it.
Yeah.
To understand it, and you could say, I don't get this, and then we
Right.
you
Yeah,
say, well, what don't you
exactly.
get?
Okay.
But
that
he
makes
did an
sense. Supposed to
amazing
respond to
thing
you.
here.
That makes sense.
What?
But then,
Stephen did an amazing thing
Oh, it's pretty
here.
great. Yeah, it's pretty
but
great.
really
maybe, because I'm hearing that all of us, we're all, it's a little fuzzy for everybody. So would it just make sense to go through it either with Brian or with Sue and just make sure that we all understand the actual definitions, just to start from there?
What I think is, rather than use their time, if I may,
Mhm.
we should use our time first
Yeah,
and then come back to them.
Okay.
And
I
see
agree.
what they
Yeah, I
think about
agree
it.
with that.
Can I make a
we
suggestion and ask
can't
one
meet without it
question?
being announced. Yeah, you go ahead, huh?
The first thing is, I think both Sue and I are more than happy to have any discussions about the software with the committee. But, and Howard, you may have said this, but I think that it wouldn't be helpful to the committee for Sue or I to give our impressions of what the criteria mean, because you are all ranking them as the committee. So I think that my suggestion is collectively, all of you need to come up with what you think they mean for the committee as a whole to be ranking. Because
Yeah.
everybody has to remember, both Sue and I, Greg, Rick, and Libby collectively rank these. So
Yeah.
I think that I don't want to merge our thoughts and definitions with the committee's thoughts and definitions, because it may then lead to a desired outcome, right? And the only other thing that I would ask is, Madam Chair, you kind of touched on it, is it is a lot of work for Sue to coordinate with Plum. And I think that, last year, for whatever reason, there was a delay, even though we had talked with the former member numerous times this early about wanting to get together for changes and the length of time it would take, and wanting to implement them, and wanting the committee to review them, and wanting the committee to sign off on them. And yet they still, for whatever reason, weren't done until late August. And there was a lot of back and forth behind the scenes about, why it wasn't done. But so I would urge the committee, if you really would like to consider changes as a whole, whether you think they're minor or substantial or not, the sooner that you discuss them and we can get them to Plum, the sooner we
Yeah.
can get them implemented and to you
Yeah.
to look at, to make sure that they're what you actually want.
Yeah, 100%, because it wouldn't be bad if they made the change and then we actually practiced a Rory or two and then said we like it.
Does the chair have a
And the
recommendation?
other thing too about that is, oh, I'm sorry, Howard, go ahead. I
I
apologize.
just want to know, do you have a recommendation of how you would like to schedule and organize this now?
Sure, well, why don't we plan to meet? The problem is everyone's gone in February and
Well,
and
I
I will tell you, it's gonna be easier if we do it in person. Not
remember
that-
last time
not
we
that
did it,
people
it
can't
was
be
in
hybrid.
July or August, and it was really awful for
Yeah, no,
Brian.
I think
and
it's fresh.
Sue.
I think we gotta do it soon.
It's got to do it soon. We have to-
I agree. Does
'Cause-
anybody want to meet next week?
I could, I'm away in 2 weeks for 2 weeks. So I
That's
could
pretty
meet-
much me too.
I could meet next week and I'll do my due diligence and do my edits with, some things I just like to recommend. And these are all recommendations. If they,
Yeah,
don't pass muster.
like I
then-
said, my
we'll go from
tweak,
there.
my end would be, I want to err on the smaller side.
Yeah,
I can only do Tuesday next week.
If we do that, Monday's a holiday, so Sue, you'd have to put this up by tomorrow. Wait, what,
Tuesday
today's
would be
Tuesday,
too soon.
sorry.
Tuesday would be too soon.
Can you,
I
and you
can't
know what,
do-
if you dialed in for this conversation,
I-
it is
I-
not gonna be useful for you.
No, and I
You-
can't even, I'm
Yeah.
like totally solid all 3 of those days.
Yeah.
Not Thursday.
You
I
really
think.
need to be
position.
sitting in these
Or
with us.
Thursday.
No, I
So
literally,
what about the following week?
yep, I can do that.
What about you?
I've gotta
Is
be-
that your good week or your
But
bad
if
week?
Jill's gone then,
No, I'm gone a week from today.
Yeah,
First thing in the morning.
How about-
2 weeks from today, first thing in the morning. I
Do you
can
need
meet,
somebody to carry your luggage?
I
Yeah.
know, I'm gone for a while. I'd have to be
Long term.
online, so if we could meet next week, that would be great, just to get it going. I mean, Caroline's not been, we want you to be here.
I
but-
definitely want to be.
But you don't actually have the historical reference that we do for having answered all these questions over the years either, so.
Mhm. Right. So
Your
it's
input's gonna be
learning for
really
me.
valuable for us about, is this a good question to ask now? Is sort of what I'm thinking about.
Mhm.
I mean, that's not to say you can't look at this and email some thoughts and ideas if for some reason the whole committee was available to meet.
Yeah.
I just don't wanna wait I don't
I
wanna wait
agree.
another month.
I don't either, and we don't need to have more 2-hour meetings.
Yeah.
Ongoing either, cause we met 25 times last year, now we're at 26, I think. So I keep saying that, I keep telling them,
Yeah.
the other boards that.
So we do know that we want to do it, and we don't need Sue and Brian for that, because it would not be a good use of their time.
Oh, but because we're all
probably be
meeting, we
there.
still have to
Sue-
have a public meeting, it has
Sue-
to be announced.
Right, but we do need to kind of decide if we're gonna, let's do one section at a time, maybe.
I think that's a good idea.
What do you think?
So you're talking 4 different meetings?
Yeah,
You think that's?
well, we could try to do two.
And just do 2 and 2 meetings?
I mean, maybe we could just try to get through as much as we could get through.
Well, how about that?
Yeah,
Why
I
not,
think, I think
yeah.
the meeting would just say, hey, we're gonna review criteria and the ratios or the values that we put on each criteria, and then have 2 meetings on that, and then I think if Plum can change it and it takes them 2 or 3 months to do that, then maybe we come back in June and practice one or something like that.
And I did just
Yeah,
write down 3 notes.
One
Is that
goal would be,
reasonable? Go ahead, Brian, sorry.
oh, I was gonna say, one goal would be to not have what's happened the last couple of years that changes have been made, is that we've roared these things. Because see, the way this process was designed to work was the department heads submit everything in Plum, Sue reviews it, Sue and I talk about it. It gets submitted to Libby. The people that I mentioned in our group look at them, review them, discuss them with departments, then we rory them, and the things that the town manager has ranked high enough get submitted to Capcom, right?
Yeah.
But what's happened in the past is we've roried them and submitted them before any of the changes to the rankings had been discussed and decided and submitted to Plum.
Right.
So our rankings were roried on different rankings
Yeah,
than
Yeah.
what you ultimately did. So granted, the spread might have been de minimis, but my goal would be that we're all ranking, we're doing them all on the same exact criterion and rank and relative and ranking ratings. So that
Yeah.
we don't have those minor deviations that occur when they change.
yeah, no, we
midstream.
wanna like for like, I hear you, that makes perfect sense.
So I wrote down some notes
Yeah.
for this. Do you want me to just sit on them or give them to Sue to give to everybody for some of the points that were raised in this meeting, or 3 or additional criteria?
Why don't, we have Sue distribute that,
Okay.
and you know not to respond, cause then that could be like a violation of a meeting law, but we could look at that.
Mhm.
And that could maybe help drive our agenda if we can meet Tuesday,
So submit thoughts to Sue?
yes,
Okay.
and then she and I can look at them. And then we could have on the agenda, and I could be specific on the agenda if you want, I mean,
What time on Tuesday?
what time works for people? I have FinCom at 4.
I can do anytime.
I cannot. Let me just look.
I can,
What works for you, Dawn?
I'm back, so anytime is fine, really.
do anytime Tuesday.
I can't do 10:30 to lunch.
So can we do it 1
Yeah,
and then try to be done by 3? Or even sooner if we really sped it up.
1,
Yeah. It's hard not to like, I definitely want to come and have an economy of words about what I want to do, rather than, just maybe we can talk about it in terms of what outcome are we trying to change here, rather than I just don't like that question. And that's what I don't want to get into, because that's gonna go nowhere.
yeah, no, I think we'll be clear on this. I think there's sort of this criteria for the criteria.
Yeah.
Um,
I could pick apart every one of those things and destroy it if I feel like it. We don't need to do that. It's a good framework and it works, but it took me definitely 2 years before I liked it as much as
Yeah.
I like it now. So I think it's excellent. I think select board should use it for their big decisions too. I think it's a really neat product.
it is. I just think it just.
Yeah. Well, I think we should probably need to tweak it every year.
I think you're right. I think that some things are confusing, and I don't think some are mutually exclusive, and some of them are
And
repetitive.
And I think they are 100% not useful for our decision making. They might be good for historical data, I guess. But
Well,
I just think there's a few things on here. I'm not thinking sweeping change. I'm just thinking, these need to be like, just
You
fine
did use the word 100%.
tuned.
Well, I think conceptually, this is not a committee that's saving money. So let's just start with that. We're spending new money. like we're recommending that the town
Mhm.
voters vote to spend new money. That's really what we're doing. So when it comes like, is this cost cutting and stuff like some of that, I'm like, no, because it's new money.
Yeah.
It is, but it's all shared money, you know, and so we have to be, you know, obviously, we all know we gotta be mindful and, you know, think about how the voter would look at things and,
Yeah, agree.
and that comes in many different directions.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so 1 o'clock, Tuesday, the 18th.
I'll be on Zoom.
Okay, that's fine. And does that work for you, Sue? And Howard is gonna email around kind of
I sent it to.
the
Sue.
specifics, and then we can talk about the agenda, but the agenda will probably just read it to review Rory's and just like
I
today.
only sent around 3 things that came out of this conversation.
Okay,
But I mean,
But-
I can forward stuff as well, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think,
No,
You said Howard's gonna send you some
I think if
specifics.
anybody has something that they want addressed and talked about next Tuesday, we
Yeah.
should do that.
Yeah.
But let's try to move it along as much as we can. I really don't want to burden the finance department. I just,
yeah, but.
they're in the middle of
Well, listen, if we get this
town meeting.
completed within the month, then I think we're way ahead of the game.
Yeah, last time it went all the way to the
To Brian's
summertime.
point.
Well, and then by then you forget. You're like,
It was.
oh,
So
really?
That's the thing, that's the thing.
Yeah, well, Capcom's tricky like that because
Then I've
each
lost my
request is
notes,
individual.
you know.
Okay, good. Well, with that, can I get, is that good with you, Brian, Sue, Don? You guys? Is that okay? All right. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
On your motion, Karen?
Aye.
Howard?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Jill, I'm an aye. Sue, Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate it.